This report on Wednesday that the historic OPEC Plus production cut deal may prevent a total disaster in the oil market, although it will be unable to stave off the impending global oil inventory build that is threatening to fill all available storage in the world over in the weeks to come. Never before has the oil industry come this close to testing its logistics capacity to the limit, the agency said in its closely watched oil market report for April. According to the IEA, the demand loss due to the coronavirus pandemic could result in a stock build of 12 million barrels per day in the first half of 2020, despite the OPEC Plus decision to cut collective production by 9.7 million barrels per day in May and June. It is noteworthy that market sentiments do not agree with an optimistic view of the industry as the international oil benchmark Brent crude slumped to 27 barrels per day. From concerns of traders that plans for the biggest production cuts in history would fail to offset the deepest fall in demand in 25 years. U.S. oil prices tumbled to an 18-year low of $19.20 a barrel on Wednesday morning, and Brent crude dropped by 5% to $27 a barrel. Brent against Nigeria's oil is priced fell by $2.09 to $27.51 per barrel as of 5:10 p.m. hours Nigerian time yesterday. Looking at the power sector, an estimated 65.56 billion naira loss has been recorded in March due to constraint from insufficient gas supply, distribution, and transmission infrastructure. Data obtained from the advisory power team in the Office of the Vice President showed that lack of gas was the biggest factor that limited power generation last month. The sector started the month with an estimated loss of 2.21 billion naira as only an average of 4,014 megawatts hour to hour recorded the biggest loss, 2.23 billion naira on March 23rd, with the average energy sent out being 3,988 megawatts per hour according to the APT data. In a move to mitigate the effects of the downward spiral of the Nigerian economy on businesses brought by the mandatory COVID-19 induced lockdown, the Presidential Enabling Business Environment Council, PEBEC, has restated its commitment to supporting the SME business community during the COVID-19 pandemic. According to the Special Advisor to the President on the Ease of Doing Business and Secretary of PEBEC, Dr. Jumoke Oduwole, while the National Action Plan 5.0 window is on hold for now, the implementation of the outstanding reforms will resume in earnest immediately the lockdown comes to an end. She also said that PEBEC Secretariat has maintained close contact with SME and the organized private sector during this period of the lockdown. The NAP 5.0 reform was to take the period of February 5th to April 4th, 2020, before the COVID-19 pandemic lockdown. These are interesting times for the Nigerian and global economy, as economists and policymakers engage in a battle of wits to create a path out of the looming global economic depression. Today, on this Coronomics special edition of Economics and Politics, we'll be discussing the impact of COVID-19 on supply chain and the operational model of the manufacturing sector. I have here with me to lead the conversation Mr. Femi Awofala, founder and CEO of Brickstone, an investment and asset management firm that's also involved in research looking at venture capital and other activities. I have here with me also my guest anchor, Mr. Bosun Omofaye, CEO, Frontier Africa Reports.
Good morning. Thank you very much for having me.
Also on Skype is Dr. Tunjo Olugbodi, the MD, CEO of Verdant Zeal Communications. He will be with us during the market review session by 10 a.m. Doctor, good morning. All right, so we'll be between from 10 a.m.
Market review.
We're looking at the
implication of COVID-19 on the business environment.
So
let's get down to the conversation.
Mr. Femi,
good morning.
Good morning. How are you doing?
Great. It's lockdown.
It's lockdown.
Phase two.
Day three.
How's the experience
going?
Well, we're fine, and it's getting. We had temporary measures at first, to take care of the lockdown, and also look at operations of how we'll be able to manage. But it seems now we have to have a long-term planning for this lockdown. You have to actually have a long-term view of. I'm now talking from a business perspective of how long do you think you'll be at home, and put on more permanent or long-term measures like have more food, and have more stock up in the house, and also look at ways in which businesses can continue in a more longer term, say 6 months. I'm not saying we're going to be locked down for 6 months, but I believe that even post COVID-19, social distancing will still be a major issue, and I don't think people will move around that easily. So you may not have business activities resume, with the swiftness, everybody, is thinking. I'm thinking that before we have really strong activity to be up to 2021. But let's see how it goes for the next 2 weeks and see how we plan ahead. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Femi. So let's first look at the illness-related labor shortages, transport interruptions, and quarantine measures which are limiting access to markets and supply chain in Nigeria. What are your reactions to these developments?
Hello, are you there?
Yes, can you hear me?
Hello, are you there?
Yes, I can hear you, Mr. Femi. Can you hear me now? Mr. Femi, can you hear me? Can you hear me, Mr. Femi? We're trying to connect with Mr. Femi, but Mr. Bolson, when we look at the developments around supply chain, the challenges we're seeing currently in terms of addressing the supply chain challenge, what are the things that you would expect to see happen more in this period? He's talked about the fact that the effect of the lockdown will still be there, and we need to find a lasting strategy that will navigate that period.
I agree that we're going to have that some more time with us to get every one of us to understand how a lockdown from a health perspective works. We've never been through this before, majority of us. So both on the business side and on individual basis. So this is a learning curve, as it were. For Nigeria, with a huge deficit in infrastructure and a very huge informal economy, it's been a very is a learning curve. Yeah. We have to be sure that we manage this pandemic and the disruptions to our daily lives, to businesses, supply chains, logistics, and what have you, in a manner that will help us limit the economic consequences on everyone, and on income and revenue, in terms of GDP growth, in terms of job losses, in terms of productivity, and the entire ecosystem, the impact on the financial markets as well, in terms of investments, whether portfolio or direct, manage the impact on outflows of capital outflows, in terms of inflation, in terms of balance of payments, capital accounts. And so it's an entire basket of how Nigeria will use this to, one, mitigate the current situation and use the downside of the current situation to learn how to do things properly. And that's, I will keep re-emphasizing each time you folks give me an opportunity to be here on your show, that I hope we're going to use this pandemic situation to learn how to do things properly and put measures in place that ensures that there's a business continuity from a government point of view. And I think we need to get that. Yes. I've had time over the last week or so to speak with some top government officials, and some top executive secretary, folks at the level of director general, whatever level, believe that what the Mr. President says is folks should sit at home and not work from home. Again, if you look at the civil service in Nigeria, the size or the volume of what you can do from home is very limited, because desktops are installed in government offices 90%, if not more. So and documents and papers are archived in the offices. They're in the hard drive of these systems in the office. They're in fireproof safes and all of that. So there's a limit to which government officials or civil servants can work from home in a lockdown environment, because they were structured ab initio to work from the office. Everybody resumes at 8 o'clock. Well, not everybody really, but technically everybody resumes at 8:30, go for lunch by 2:30, prayers, whatever it is, whatever, and then come back and then go. Everybody picked up their bags and go home. So the bulk of the civil service administration in Nigeria, the public service, is in the house, with the exception of ministers and a few others. Even when you look at some of the digital conferencing, whatever that we've seen from some of the top government officials, they're largely done from the offices, not from home, which means that they need access to all of this at the office. And if a particular director general or the head of an agency need to hold a meeting, whatever, it has to go to the office, because that's where you have the internet access or whatever. That's where the entire structure for him to work are located. So there's a limit to which you can work from home at the public service level. So we need to also use this opportunity, not just to supply chains, but to see that government officials at certain levels should be able to work from home, and don't just sit at home or stay home and stay safe as a statement meaning that you don't have to work at all. Again, if you look at the contribution of our public service to the GDP, is meager, around 3%. So it's not a very huge contributor to the country's GDP ab initio. No, I'd never been. So at this point, you can see the contribution of the public service sector to the GDP even much lower. Okay, so we need to see that we need to find another way to go for what you call e-government.
Across board. Across
board, we need to have e-government moving forward, because whether we like it or not, is the government that will drive this COVID-19, post-COVID-19 economic recovery. It is the job of the fiscal authority.
Let me try to get on Mr. Femi Awofala. Mr. Femi, can you hear me?
I can hear now, but I hadn't been hearing before, but you can go ahead.
Okay. Nice to have you.
Nice to have you. Now, we're looking at the illness-related labor shortages, transport interruptions, and even the quarantine measures that are limiting access to market and supply chain in the country. What's your reaction to how this is affecting, at this point, the economic activities and even the manufacturing activities?
Okay, great. So if you look at issues related to labor, one of the biggest things you see is the fact that people are complaining of job losses and things. But on the flip side, Nigeria's manufacturing has so much of expatriate staffs from Europe and China, and a number of those expatriates have now moved back to their home countries because of COVID-19. Either they've gone on their own, willingly, or they've repatriated. Now, what you will see is the fact that a number of Nigerian or African nationals will now be able to step into this job opportunities. Is there the skill gap available, to take on these senior roles that may be open, to be used? I doubt it, but there might be need for capacity building. In terms of raw material supply, let me say 60 to 70% of a number of manufacturing companies, especially on the small and medium scale, food, beverage, and the likes of biscuits and confectionaries, they all get importation both on equipment and major raw materials from China or Asia, what will happen is the fact that there's going to be a glut in the market post-COVID-19, whereby the biggest demand or suppliers will go first to the companies that are supplying in huge volumes. So if you are a small volume buyer from China, you may not get your supply almost immediately. What could happen is you could get your supplies after a period of a lag, maybe about 3 to 6 months after a number of orders have been fulfilled. But the question now boils down to, it also opens another market for raw materials of a number of manufacturers. For example, in aluminum, huge aluminum are still imported from China, and turned into coils and turned to roofing sheets in Nigeria. You have a number of other paper materials that are imported and things. So the question now is, there's going to be a lag in raw material sourcing in terms of inbound logistics, and that also poses an opportunity for us to look inwards and start manufacturing this raw material, or start providing these raw materials locally. On the area of supply chain, in terms of movement and logistics, that also is going to be a big issue, because with the area of what we call social distancing, you basically will not have as much vehicles moving as they used to. So issues of movement of goods and services may be delayed a little bit, and things like that. But in a nutshell, it throws some opportunities for entrepreneurs to take advantage of the need for a new source of raw materials for Nigerian businesses. Now, the area of disruption is very critical, because if your business model was based on getting raw materials from China or Asia or even Europe, you may not have that raw material in the next 6 months, but you may still have a viable market or demand, to provide for. But now the question now boils down, how do you meet that demand? It could also lead to an increase in price, because you might have to get raw materials from areas where you normally would not source. But it just creates that disruption in the market for opportunities and also and to cover it all up, we see that the economy might go into a what you call an exchange rate depreciation further, which will mean that your raw materials, where you were buying from manufacturers, will go at a higher price. So the incentive to keep importing raw materials to produce Nigerian goods, or assemble, so to say, is becoming a little bit more glim. So you are challenged by the supply. You are also challenged by exchange rates. So now is two sectors I think will have to really speed up development: is the agriculture sector, and also the solid mineral sector, and also the textile sector. So you have these sectors being heavily impacted by raw materials if they have to source overseas. But if they are going to get them locally, government has to come up with a robust plan that can allow this to be sourced locally. I think I'll just stop from there now and allow others to take on. Yeah, over to you.
But you've talked about agriculture, soil minerals, and even textile. And you know that the acute shortage of raw materials, Mr. Femi,
and intermediate inputs needed even in the manufacturing sector at this point are due to these travel restrictions coming from the lockdowns and the COVID-19 pandemic developments. So how will we develop this local raw material sourcing in an effective manner that it will go through the whole value chain and ecosystem?
Okay, so to look at that, if you look at the FMCG, the food and beverage, even the beverages, the number of drinks and co, a number of them still get imports overseas to add to the local. So it's still about, let's say, 40 to 50% local sourcing, another 40 to 60% offshore sourcing. What the issue now is, you have to go up to 90% of local sourcing of your raw materials. There is no option you have whatsoever. So now is the time for government to introduce a new set of incentives to look at these critical food and beverage areas and say, you know what, now we need to provide maybe policies or financing to go to making the local inputs required in biscuits. So wheat, for example, if you look at all the noodles we eat and spaghetti, you know, there's a huge wheat component in them. And wheat is still imported into this country every now and then, because our wheat, you know, growth is not that effective enough to allow these manufacturers to go. So I think the ball is in the government court to take advantage of not necessarily funding. So this is why I see the disruption in CBN thinking around. You not necessarily focus on funding the end of the value chain. So you want to provide incentives to SMEs, but they still don't have raw materials. So they probably take that money and pay salaries and help to, you know, get their business maybe some few fixed assets they need. But to go as a going concern, I think CBN needs to step back and map out the value chain of critical sectors in the economy, say, for example, mineral processing, say, for example, food and beverage that has dependence on agriculture, and say, you know what, now need.
Mr. Femi, can you hear me?
Over the last, yeah, I can hear you.
Okay.
I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Okay, go on.
Yeah,
Yes, go on.
Yeah. So it's not going to be easy. It's not a fire brigade approach, because, you know, it's not when a man is drowning that he now learns how to swim, you know, as the adage goes. So it's going to be like a 2-year to 3-year plan of actually getting Nigeria self-sufficient, you know, in terms of raw materials required for a number of critical manufacturing nodes. So to answer your question, there are some sectors that are already developing that maybe they are not yet standardized. So for example, in the oil and gas sector, they use a material called barite, you know, in mud logging and drilling. But barite is available in Nigeria, but it's not of the right, they need, you know, you need the right equipment to process it, you know, to the right standards. But now all the oil and gas companies still needs to go and buy barite from Morocco or buy barite from Europe and bring it to Nigeria. So there has to be a very logical pathway to enable, you know, these raw materials to be provided and to come at the right standard. Thank you.
Nice thoughts from you.
Nice thoughts from you, Mr. Femi. You've talked about policy
and the need for all stakeholders in the policy space to really incentivize the activities in the value chain and manufacturing. And speaking to that, Mr. Bolson, the 27-page document of the Central Bank of Nigeria, talking about the Infraco Plc and even looking at manufacturing, do you have a question for Mr. Femi Awofala based on in terms of?
Well, I think he spoke very well to some of the things that we need to do. I would just clarify a few points. That the latest policy response document from the Central Bank seemed to address some of his concerns. And that is that if you read that document very well, you find out that the Central Bank is now talking about raw materials and the processors and then the end market. Perhaps that had not been on the front burner previously, but now the new policy response from the Central Bank 3 days ago spoke about a 3-year program. So which means that the Central Bank is reading the thoughts of Mr. Awofala here. As a private sector person, knowing that this has to be about 2 to 3 year program to get Nigeria to navigate through these muddy waters a bit into of a blue ocean. Now, the new policy response speaks to how the central bank will intervene from farm to market. And in between, within this value chain, are those who are processors. So I think taking advice from the private sector, and which is a regular interaction that the central bank has with the textile manufacturers, with cotton farmers, with other agro producers, and oil palm and state government, they've come to see that, look, there are some missing links, and that is now being addressed moving forward. So this learning curve, I think the authorities are taking that on board, knowing that, one, you're intervening in rice or in cotton or textile, or hold on a second, who are the off-takers here? And this is also going into the housing delivery. So the central bank is also part of the 3-year new policy approach is also that even for the housing sector, you need to have those who are financially strong off-takers for the housing sector. So in the agriculture, agro-allied, which includes textiles and all of that, you need to those who are there. Then he spoke about those who need equipment, or certain equipment to have fine processing for a product like borite. Now, the central bank in that document spoke about assisting the manufacturers or industries that need this type of machinery will have the fund in conjunction with the commercial banks. So I think the Bankers Committee, which is the primary body through which the central bank take advice on what to do, have seen the problems that enterprises, businesses, and others have put together, and professionals like Mr. Awofala here, and they are taking that on board. Because when companies talk to their banks first, I want to take a loan for XYZ, and the bank says, look, you can produce this, and I say, yes, we have it, but we don't have equipment to fine process it for what we need. So we just bring in the raw material from China, India, whatever. Now, the banks can speak directly to the central bank and say, if we incentivize these guys to have this machinery from China in Nigeria, we can process it locally. You've created jobs. You've reduced your foreign exchange of importing those materials you need in the solid minerals. And you are making it faster because you're producing in the back end. Our local content also, development also gets a lot higher. Research will come along that same corridor. So it's a learning curve here. Some of these things are now being learned in a very hard way by the relevant government authorities, that we need to see this product or these issues from end to end, rather than just throwing money at farmers only, producing rice, producing cotton. As we speak, the African Development Bank, the EFDB group, is having an engagement with textile producers across Africa.
Looking at how to boost that industry.
Yes, how to boost the textile industries, because this is one huge multi-billion-dollar business, exports business for the Western, the Chinese, the Asian markets, and the Indians into Africa. Yeah. So EFDB is also intervening in that area, and I said that by 2 days ago. Nigerian textile folks should also key into that. This also goes in line with what the Central Bank of Nigeria had set out, made a focal point, I think in the Q1 of last year, when they had certain meetings with the Arewa textile mills, the Nigeria textile mills in Kaduna, met with some state governments, those who have the largest land mass for producing cotton. And some of this cotton are being produced. How to get it to the end user is also another conversation. So I think some of these are being addressed moving forward. I think Mr. Awofala is among those who are right-thinking and see that, look, we need to keep tweaking our policy and actions and approaches moving forward to address these issues. But we must understand one thing very quickly, Otto.
Okay, I think, Mr. Awofala, I was just going to get you to...
We may have to bite, we're going to bite a bit of a bullet. So currency depreciation will have to be a bullet that we may have to bite in a short term to allow us to have a long-term gain. There's no way, if you swim naked, once the tide is out, you must be ready to suffer those few seconds before some folks get some clothes around your mid-level. So there's no two way about it. You can't make an omelette without breaking an egg. I'm not a scientist, but I'm sure maybe science folks will find a way around that in the future. But as of today, you need to break the egg before you make an omelette. So we'll do a bit of currency depreciation But again, the authorities should be ready. Yeah, please go ahead, sir.
Let me get Femi Awofala to react his view about the...
Go ahead, sir.
We'd like to get your view about the CBN document in terms of what Mr. Bolson is talking about. Yeah. Yes, I can hear you.
You can go on, Mr. Femi.
Oh, okay. So, yeah. So what I was just trying to say was the fact that I think CBN needs to be very careful in how we always looked at this issue of stimulation and stimulus. There needs to be a very close integration with the physical itself, with the physical stimulus, and the physical policies, because at the end of the day, the entrepreneurial aspect of things, should never be underplayed. Yes, you can give money to somebody to go do this or provide a loan, but the capacity building of these entrepreneurs is also an important aspect. A number of times you find out that banks in Nigeria are more willing to loan money to expatriates, to local Indians, to Indians and Chinese locally here than Nigerian businesses. And if you go to their records, you see major of the manufacturing companies that do manufacturing work in Nigeria who get loans or working capital, accountability culture. So I would rather say that CBN should please work with the ministries of trade and investments and other sustaining ministries to ensure that the right entrepreneurs are the ones that are being brought out to benefit from these things. If you look at all the intervention we've had, from the rice mills we had during Jonathan's time, from all the other interventions we've had in various ministries in Nigeria, because of corruption or something or the other, those opportunities don't land with the right people. Yes, government has the money. Yes, they have the right objective. They have the attitude and the willingness to do it. But when you don't when you don't put the right peg in the right hole, then your whole resources is just wasted. What I would advocate for government is to run a guarantee scheme or a scheme that provides what you call co-investing with Nigerian banks, such that when a Nigerian bank or any financial institution in Nigeria lends money to a particular sector, the CBN, through its intervention fund, will match that lending or even double it, so that the initial due diligence, the initial risk taking is being taken up by the bank themselves. Not that CBN gives money to the bank to unlend. No. We need to work in a situation whereby we all have to take part in the risk. What I have always advocated for was a situation where we just don't give money to Nigerian entrepreneurs or SMEs and the banks just monitor or they earn a facility fee. No, the banks must also lend money. So if you are looking for 30 million naira, the bank must be willing to lend you 10, while CBN intervention will lend you 20. So that is what in finance we call it parallel funding or co-investment, whereby the CBN now provides that co-investment, but only on the basis if the bank is ready to expose you risk. I think we need to, let me use the word, we need to try and look at the real reasons why banking intervention or government interventions have failed over the last 10 years. We need to really look at it properly, because as much as I like the CBN document, as much as I'm impressed about the infrastructure approach and things, I think it is still not it's still not okay, or it's still not appropriate for government to be investing equity capital in infrastructure projects in Nigeria. What government needs to do in the infrastructure space is to co-invest, or such that when you as an entrepreneur or as a banker or as a financial institution have used your own risk capital to invest in a deal, match in line with what Boston had mentioned. Thank you.
I really appreciate that.
And just to also add to what you've eloquently put together based on your experience on the field, I think a few things here is one, I think over the years and by my journalistic experience, and you're very, very correct, banks will just put the money down and whatever, they don't want to take risks and all of that. I think over time, things are changing, albeit very slowly. And banks are now being encouraged to be a lot more of risk takers rather than just a reluctant giver, but a cheerful taker. So on that premise is that the central bank has been pushing and using policies in recent times to push the banks to become more of risk takers. If you look at some of what the central bank pushed out in terms of policies, or what you call this unorthodox monetary policies over the last 2 years or 3 years, it's been more of, look, we're going to use your CRR to get you to lend. So instead of the central bank doing the lending, the central bank says, you have so much money sitting with us, banks. So we've got the CRR, so there's so much liquidity available. Lend this money, okay? If you lend it, we will now open up your CRR and give you the money back. But we want to see that you are taking the risks. So that is one under the aspect of the CRR-induced credit market. And then if you see last year, the bank started, if you look at the newspapers, were advertising for the creative industry, music, movie production, and what have you, fashion and what have you. And in those industries. And if you see those advertorials, the Bankers Committee and the various banks are asking these professionals in these industries to step forward with their proposals, and they are working with them to make sure that they also match up what they will be getting from the banks. And I'm encouraged, a little bit encouraged with that the thinking is beginning to change a little bit. It's been a long way in the wilderness for us, from the banking sector, even the central bank and the fiscal authorities. To walk our way out of the wilderness, we have to walk our way out of the wilderness into an oasis. So nobody's going to bring oasis to us. So we have to walk our way out of it in a manner in which we don't all perish in the wilderness. So that is on one side. If you look at Infraco again, if I may just clear that up, and I think the central bank should provide a bit more clarity. I spoke with two on the Infraco PLC. I spoke with two of the highest officials of the central bank for quite some time, and I sought their clarity when I read that particular paragraph, that the central bank or the federal government of Nigeria is not putting money on the table for this. So it's not a government agency, number one. Number two, what the central bank is trying to do is to use its own integrity and believability to get investors, private sector's investors, to come together and form a fund. Through this, the central bank is saying, if you guys can do 1.5 trillion in the first instance to be managed by an independent fund manager, not to be appointed by the central bank. So once this is done, it's just midwifing this 1.5 trillion in the first instance, and then they can do both debt and equity together, which means that they will have to go to either the local market or international market for listing of Infraco PLC, which is different from NASL. The approach of NASL was different, and I think the central bank is learning by the day. I think I'll give that to them. They are beginning to learn from their mistakes and misses, and they are taking on board points of correction, if I may put it that way, suggestions, comments, opinions, even criticisms from the organized private sector on how to get this thing going. So infrastructure through the Infraco is not getting the central bank to put money on the table, but to get the private sector to do it and assist the government. And because this is a private sector led, just a second, a quick one. Because it's a private sector led, if you have companies that are into logistics, for example, like UPS and Red Star Express, those that are listed on the stock exchange, for example, and they want to do a right issue, or those Red Star Express can approach. Yes, Red Star Express can approach this Infraco PLC and say, we want to get XY amount of money, The money belongs to the private sector, the PFAs, the insurance, the big banks, and everybody. We want to take this money. We want to invest in logistics that will enable us to move finished products from farms to the processors. Cassava, yam, rice, cotton, and other things, including the solid mineral sector that you rightly pointed out. Solid minerals, very, very key. So they'll be able to intervene through the private sector in this particular area. It's a way of relieving the federal government of going borrowing globally and try to apply it locally, and we all know the bottlenecks and what have you. Right now, it doesn't look like Nigeria will get any foreign loans that we have applied for in the short term. We should just forget about it. That is not going to happen within the next 90 days, unless something else come out of the blues. So because the agencies, World Bank, IMF, they are dealing with the most vulnerable and poor countries in the world right now.
Even the G20 had to...
Yes, so the clarification on that. So we are not among the first off-takers in terms of debt relief or whatever help. We thank the European Union and others who are giving us a few for assistance. But for now, through the front door, we can't get anything. So that means ideas that you have put together will come into play here, in which the central bank can take that document, like you rightly read, quickly take a second look at it all over again, take advice and comments from folks like your good self and others, and see how we can use it to move ourselves forward. I like the guarantee scheme that you talked about.
And co-investing.
And co-investing. That is the way to go. In particular, not just throwing money at everything like fire brigade approach, but making sure that we have the institutional expertise and learning. And that is why, again, part of the central bank new policy spoke about research institutions, and universities. And I love that. If you go to that, I think from about page 23 downwards towards the end, the central bank spoke about why it is necessary to begin to include the nexus between all our universities. By now should be churning out research papers, use the laboratories to help the government. But they were largely ivory towers without any ivory, as it were. So now this is the time now to support even these research institutions, both public and private, in particular the universities, because that is where the best of the youngest brains are domiciled. And that is very key. We're using the best brains in innovation and creativity in the textile, in the ICT, digital world, software, music, movies, and what have you. We're not doing that in research in the universities. It's just amazing. So it is time, because we don't have the facilities. All the laboratories are just named laboratories in the universities. There's nothing there. Those who are lecturers who have what it takes are not incentivized enough because the equipments are not there. There's no light in the laboratory. There's no gas. The equipment and other chemicals they need are not available. And nobody's producing them locally. So we're just importing them, like rightly put, from China, Europe, and elsewhere. So fixing these research and research institutions. Look at the report of I think the House of Reps Committee on Medical Research Institutes last year. It was.
There's need for
we just need to close our eyes with both hands. Yeah. And they went through all the medical research institutes and FIRO and the rest of them, the one Shodi and the rest, and they couldn't believe the abysmal level of the state of these research institutes.
So they have to be revamped.
So they need to be revamped. So I think the central bank will take these guys. I think these guys also on board, because we can bring machinery and whatever. RMRDC, the Raw Materials Research Development Council, which is the RMRDC, for example, an agency I've known since I was a rookie in journalism in the early 90s, and a few others. You need to bring them to speed to be able to research and hand over products that can help. You talk about wheat and you talk about sorghum and what have you. Some of the products that we need for the processor or we need to plant, what about the soil and the seedlings and what have you? Where are the institutions? Where are the research institutes? This should be done by universities. I had the opportunity of going to University of Ohio in in Ohio, and I saw what you can do.
Doing there?
You can produce biofuel from by universities. How many universities in Nigeria can produce biofuel, for example?
So investment in research.
Investment in research and university education is very, very key.
So, Mr. Femi, can you give us your pathway going forward? Because we know that this pandemic, you talked about the challenges of the lockdown, of course, how it's affecting the supply chain, manufacturing activities and all that. What will you be expecting to see in a policy pathway that will help us navigate this period and see us boost manufacturing and productivity as an economy? With your closing thoughts too.
Yeah, as Bosun has mentioned, I think the key issues in summary are more has to do with, first of all, what type of, what's the financial stability of these manufacturing companies and what is their supply chain model. And as he mentioned also, based on the CBN response, we need to quickly, so talking from an entrepreneurial perspective as a manufacturer, you quickly need to look inwards at your supply chain and quickly identify local options that are available, even though they might not be of the right standard, but you need to find them. And if you are big enough, you can even acquire them and buy them up, and now get them. What's stopping Guinness Nigeria, to buy, 5 or 6 farms that need a particular sorghum or cassava for its beers, So a number of multinational companies now to do a bit of backward integration, but not just lip service, but actually going there, involved in the backward integration thing, and getting these farmers to provide and the equipments and things. And he also mentioned like Shell, or all these oil and gas companies that require local inputs, they also need to backward integrate. So in a nutshell, I would rather say, instead of leaving the work of getting the supply to the supplier, manufacturers now need to start thinking of backward integration, forming subsidiary companies that can actually produce these inputs, and they can also even sell it to their competitors or other people. Number 2, he mentioned infrastructure, in terms of infrastructure that's available for manufacturers, to be able to move goods from their farms to the urban areas and things. I think it's important, and I think one of the things we can do with that is to develop agro parks, like an industrial agriculture park, whereby you can have a number of rice farmers in Benue or in Taraba who are not about 100 kilometers from each other, and you have a very decent road network that helps all of them to basically get their things to the urban areas. Another creative way might also be for CBN to also invest in mobile processing plants. So instead of carrying tons of tomato from Kaduna or Kano down to Lagos, I might still need the tomato processed. So why can't I process the tomato just like Dangote is doing in Kano and get it into a more processed form, refrigerate it, and I can start selling it, I can air freight it, better. So processing is key for a number to reduce unnecessary transport requirements. So the point is key on that. Then also, I will also say that for supply chain, it's critical for government to also try and help in getting the right equipment that these local producers require to produce more efficiently. So equipment is key. Then also you mentioned R&D in terms of research from our universities. My own little idea on that is that we actually need to create specialized postgraduate schools. We can't really depend on these current professors. I'm not saying they're not also good, but I'm saying that government needs to create special postgraduate universities which are focused on R&D. If you just need like 6, because what has happened is we look at things like artificial intelligence and you look at the computer science in Nigeria. How many computer science professors who have passed through computer science can now start doing research in R&D or in artificial intelligence or biotechnology and things. There's a bit of a gap in the knowledge base. Also, don't equip universities, but we need to find a way to create a new postgraduate school, get new lecturers who are at the forefront of research, and now start doing those so that you can buy up that time that was lost. So I would suggest, CBN, even if it's just 6 in every geopolitical zone, a postgraduate university focused on R&D, nothing else. A postgraduate university, the whole facility was not going to be bigger than the Lagos Business School you have, along the Lekki Expressway. But on post, yeah, thank you.
CEO Brickstone Africa for your incisive contributions today as we looked at COVID-19 and the impact on supply chain, operation models for manufacturing sector, and my special guest here with me, Mr. Boston Mofaye.
Thank you so
Financial
much.
Analyst and CEO, Frontier Africa Reports. And that will be all for this segment of the Economics Discourse, looking at economy and politics activities in this period of the COVID-19 pandemic. Next, 10 a.m., we're going to have Dr. Tunji Olugbodu, the MD CEO of Vedant Communications Limited, who will be taking us through the implications of COVID-19 on the business environment.